I figured I should probably wait a bit to discuss this deck until I was a little more confident in the choices in the deck, but I'm actually quite happy with where the deck is at right now, so let's discuss it. This is Mono Black Waste Not for Explorer, but loosely Pioneer, mostly Explorer. I got personally excited about the prospect of building this deck based on the lovely reprint from the Enchanting Tales and Wild of Eldraine, and I got a playset because their last picks, they go around the table a bunch in Limited, so I think I've got more than 4 of them. Waste Not wants to play heavy into its discard, and one of the nice new cards that actually supports that discard is this, Hopeless Nightmare. It makes opponents discard a card and lose 2 life, and if it's put into the graveyard, scry 2, which is not trinket text in this deck. Because in our sorceries, we are playing 2 copies of Beseech the Mirror to be able to sacrifice those enchantments to find some bullets, like our 2 Go Blanks, our Ritual of Soot, and our Extinction event to be able to rat the board. And with all these extra enchantments lying around, plus the zombie tokens that Waste Not makes, Bargain is usually online. Some other nice threats that we can get off of Bargain, or just by casting them, are 3 Liliana of the Veil, our 2 Liliana of the Last Hope, our 2 Sheoldred, and our 3 Graveyard Trespassers. I've play-tested with 4 Lilies. It's honestly a bit much. They kind of defeat themselves. Lily of the Last Hope is quite good against tokens. Sheoldred is fantastic, especially when you're ripping people's hands apart and they don't have the resources to get rid of the Sheoldred. And Graveyard Trespasser's ward is to discard a card, which makes it a little bit better option than Lord Skidder the Sewer King. Other spells worth discussing in the deck include Thoughtseize down below, but Thoughtseize is great, of course it is, and it's in a discard deck, so it's right at home. But Go Blank is worth noting because it's so good against so many matchups, especially given the prevalence of graveyard decks in the meta. We have 7 pieces of instant speed interaction. Sheoldred's Edict has proven a little stronger than Go for the Throat in my experience, but it's column A, column B. And Fatal Push is, of course, quite good against the aggro decks, which the hyper aggro decks we can struggle a little against. We've usually been doing pretty well against the mid-range aggro decks like Mono White. But before we talk about matchups, we should talk about some of our utility lands, including our Field of Ruins, our Locthwains to get some advantage, our Hive of the Eye Tyrant to have a manland, our Mirrex to have another pseudo manland that's very good against the control decks, and Gaia Reach Sanitarium, which is an essential land in this deck because it allows you to keep your opponent discarding cards even when they're out of cards in hand, and lets you loot away some of those extra Thoughtseizes. And now we can't talk about matchups without talking about our sideboard. So we have 1 Field of Ruin that usually comes in against Mono Green Tron, and I usually sideboard out Takenuma because there's a 1 of Takenuma in the deck. 2 was too many, and honestly, Field of Ruin is fine against Mono Green Tron. You could also take out 1 of the Mirrexes. Graveyard Trespasser, extra Sheoldred, and the 3 Invoke Despairs are a good way to switch over to a more mid-range game plan against other mid-range decks. Your Waste Nots ensure that you have a better late game than them, but being able to really beat out the mid-range decks really helps quite a bit. Leyline of the Void and Lost Legacy are pretty much in here for Greasefang, although Lost Legacy has some additional game against Mono Green by naming Karn or Cavalier of Thorns, which this deck has a little trouble with. An extra Ritual of Soot up here and an extra Meathook Massacre down at the bottom help us against aggro decks, and the Meathook Massacre actually just wholesale beats a lot of the Rakdos, like cat food decks. Lastly, the Elder Spell and the 2 copies at the end are there for Mono Green. The Elder Spell is quite good against their Planeswalkers, and the end is a good way to neutralize the Karn or the Cavalier of Thorns that kind of plague us. They're one of the ways that Mono Green can pretty effectively beat us. There are some just plain bad matchups. I mentioned Hyper Aggro. I feel like my win rate has to be under 40% against the red-white Convoke deck. That matchup is just very luck dependent. There are some good elements though. Extinction Event is quite good in that matchup. Discard ends up actually being pretty decent in that matchup, and some of the mid-range threats end up being pretty good in the matchup. So it's not impossible to win, it's just significantly less likely, and they can just run you over before you can realistically do anything. But yeah, that's Waste Not for Explorer. Let me know what you thought of the deck. If you want to play it yourselves, I put the deck list in my Mox field listed as Waste Not, so you should be able to copy it and then import it into Magic Arena if you want to play my specific list. But enjoy!